Welcome to the BizBin Podcast, the show that explores all topics relating to selling and buying small to mid-sized California businesses. And now let's join nationally known consultant and author, the host of this podcast, Peter Siegel.
Hi, this is Peter Siegel with BizBin. Today we have Craig Oosterhouse, who is a business broker here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're going to talk about sellers' unrealistic expectations about pricing when they go to sell their business, and probably some other topics of interest to sellers, agents, brokers, and business buyers. So, Craig, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I think this is the first program that you've been on, so tell us a little bit about what you do.
I'm a business broker here in the Bay Area. Help people sell their existing businesses. My background is in accounting, which eventually led to becoming an entrepreneur. So I've been a long-time serial entrepreneur, owned, bought, and sold my own businesses. So now I just use that experience to help people sell their businesses.
Fantastic. So today's show is about sellers' unrealistic expectations. I see it a lot in the Pro Sell program when I go to help assist sellers put a value on their business for sale by owners, and some agents and brokers use the service as well. And I know I have a series of questions, so I'd like to ask you these questions, and let's get to the bottom of this issue. Sound good?
That sounds good.
All right. So the first question is, what percentage of the business owners that you deal with that you feel have realistic expectations when it comes to the number that they can expect as a selling price for their business?
I think the percentage is very small, people who actually have a realistic price. I would say about 75% of, clients I deal with have an unrealistically high expectation of what they can expect for their, as a selling price for their business. Very few people have a lower and are pleasantly surprised by what they can get. But for the most part, I would say most small business owners, don't really have a realistic idea of what they can expect as a selling price.
Yeah, and I concur with you. I think it is that high as well, too. And I think the statistic for California small businesses is that about 75% of all small businesses never end up selling, and the number one reason is too high a price. So that leads into the next question. Why do you think the sellers or owner sellers have unrealistic expectations? What leads to that?
Well, I think it's changing now, but over the last several years, there just hasn't been much information, available to the public on what a small business sells for. I think they get bad information from people who don't necessarily know. I had a client who asked his accountant how much he thought his business was worth, and he told him, and it was just really high, and I asked him if he had his checkbook out when he told him that number, because what the accountant says or what an article you saw online or things like that don't necessarily show what the marketplace is willing to pay for your business. So I think it's just the bad information that people get, and they, compare their business to other investments such as real estate or other investment vehicles, and they're just not really similar. So it's bad information and bad comparisons, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you that the instances I've seen is where owners go to their CPAs and they ask their CPAs what they think the business is worth. And that is invariably too high. And I'm not sure what multiples that the CPAs are using, but that's not their main line of business. So I don't fault them for that. The second thing I see too is these owners will ask their friends who quote unquote have sold their business for a fair price on what they've sold their business for, but they have no idea of what all the variables are for those friends' businesses, right? What the gross sales are or what the lease term was, and all these other very important variables are. So I think you're absolutely right. It's just bad information. So that leading into the next question is, so how do you manage then these expectations?
It's difficult, because a lot of people just hear what they want to hear, and they want to take advice from people who give them information that coincides with what they're already thinking. But the best way is just to show. What I do is I show my clients, look, here's what people are paying for your type of business out in the marketplace right now, or what they've paid for in the past. Because really, the only person's opinion that counts is the guy that's got his checkbook out. He's ready, willing, and able to buy your business. So the amount he's willing to pay is really what the true price of the business is going to be in the end when it sells. So I show them what people who are out there buying businesses over the past few years are paying for businesses similar to theirs. And then also I show them, here's some businesses that are similar to yours that are for sale right now. So the guy who is ready, willing, and able to buy a business and is looking for your type of business out there in the market, he's looking at these 5 or 6 businesses too. So if your price isn't in line with sort of what those are doing as well, you're not going to get any interest.
And I agree with those approaches with a couple caveats. Number one, I know when I was a business broker many moons ago, I would just do comps or what businesses have sold for in the geographic area that the business is located in. For example, a liquor store that's selling in the San Francisco Bay Area, particularly let's say San Francisco, and a liquor store selling for in Mobile, Alabama, probably will have different criteria. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, by far. I mean, there's lots of criteria I put into it. It's kind of a simplistic explanation, but yeah, geographic area, and there's some other things that come into it as well. But time frame, recency, things like that. There's a lot that goes into it, but definitely the area is one of the most important aspects.
Yeah, because I see a lot of brokers doing that with their clients, saying, okay, well, let's look at comps throughout the United States. And you really can't do that. And I particularly see that with residential real estate agents who just come into business brokerage and looking for quote unquote comps. The other thing too, you mentioned also too, businesses that are on the market now currently for sale. You've got to be careful with that, because what I find with that is most business owners and brokers who list their businesses usually are too high, as we talked about earlier. 75% are too high. So you have to look and see how long the business has been on the market, because you've got to figure that 75% of those that have been on the market under 30 days perhaps may be overvalued. They're just trying to see if somebody will bite and buy the business. Would you agree?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay. So what are some of these approaches that usually work then? Any other approaches?
Well, I think it's important too to remember that a lot of businesses, you could probably comment on this better, but a lot of businesses that do sell are sold to related parties. So if a father sells a business to his son or his nephew, or maybe a group of employees, and they've got inside information, it's much less risk when you're selling to a related party, someone that really knows what the business is doing. So that's going to sell at a higher price. So if you're comparing your business to something that a similar business but sold to a related party, it's not going to get the same price from the general public. What percentage do you think of businesses that sell are actually sold to related parties?
Oh, that's a tough one. Probably, you mean like an inside, like a employee or a family member or something?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat lower. I would maybe say 15-20%, maybe somewhere in there. Because realistically, you have 3 types of buyers. You have an insider, which would be an employee or a family member, somebody like that. Then you have a financial buyer who is just buying it to replace a job, let's say. And then you have the strategic buyer who's buying it to maybe get other locations, or it's more of a strategic purchase. So I would think, that inside buyer is probably 15-20%. What do you think?
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right to me. It's
yeah,
just you got to be careful when you're looking at comps, because if you're comparing against something like that, the price you can expect is going to be lower.
Yeah, and I don't think comps really, do they decipher whether it's kind of an inside buyer, if you will?
No, they don't. They don't, so.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So when sellers are looking at that, they should try and decipher if they can, if it is an inside buyer or if it's a buyer from the outside, because it's very different. The other thing too that affects price, and I talk to people that go to get financing as a financing consultant, are you paying cash for the business, or is there some kind of terms and conditions? So for example, is the owner carrying back a note for 10, 15, or 25%? Because sometimes the price can be a little bit higher if the owner is willing to take back a note or finance part of it. Again, coming back to the time value of money situation.
Sure.
And I know a lot of brokers and agents have kind of poo-pooed that and said, look, a price is a price basically. But I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that, if it's a cash price, it may be something. And then if the owner is willing to give terms and conditions, the price could be higher.
Yeah, I definitely agree. A large part of the business price when it comes to small businesses is that uncertainty, that amount of risk that lowers the multiple for, something like a small business. But when the seller is willing to carry, a portion of the sales price, it just gives the buyer confidence that the business is going to continue in the future as it has in the past. If the owner believes it because he's willing to accept financing, then the buyer will be more likely to believe it. And then that therefore should, push the price up a little bit.
Yep, good point. So now we're going to kind of dive into a little bit different area. So what usually happens with a seller who has an unrealistic expectation regarding the price of his business, but still wants to list the business for sale? What happens then?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the listing price is ultimately the seller's decision. I advise my clients on, my job is to get that price as close as it can to, give you the highest chance of success. But ultimately, the price that it's listed for is the seller's decision. And if they just want to list a high, we list a high. A lot of people, you mentioned it just a few minutes ago, a lot of people just put a price out there to see if they can get anybody to buy someone that really wants that type of business. That's just a strategy that a lot of buyers use out there. Price high at first and lower it later. I don't know that it works that well, but that's what happens a lot.
Yeah, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that approach. I know when I was a business broker, I had a story typically of why I priced the business the way I did when I counseled my seller clients. And even in the Pro Sell program on BizBen, I still do that because they need to explain to business buyers how they got that price and why it makes sense. Because usually the first question from a buyer is, well, where's the business located? And the second question is what's in it for me, right? What's the adjusted net income or the cash flow? And then they want to know the price. And they usually want to delve into, well, how did you get the price? And there better be a good story there, whether it relates to return on investment or comps or something. But I feel that too many agents and brokers in our industry just acquiesce to the seller, and the seller says, I want X, Y, Z, and the broker says, yeah, fine, and then just put it out in the marketplace. And I think that's why the statistics are so high of an unsold rate in California. I think brokers and agents and sellers should do their due diligence and price it accordingly. The other aspect of this too, Craig, that I find is that the first 30 to 40 days is the most critical on BizBen when selling a business, because if it's priced too high and you start lowering the price, like a lot of sellers want you to do, it looks flaky to business buyers. And business buyers start thinking, well, what's wrong with this business? If they're starting to really drop the price on a wholesale basis, what is going on with this business? So you're going to lose a lot of your audience if you do that type of strategy. What do you feel about that?
I agree. I think you mentioned it before. There's a finite amount of people who are out there looking for, say, a bakery in the San Francisco Bay Area. And those same, let's call it 30 or 40 people are constantly watching for a bakery. So when yours pops up and they take a look at it, and it's just nowhere near the true realistic selling price, they think, man, this guy is going to be difficult to deal with. If just right off the bat, his price isn't realistic. It's probably not going to be realistic about anything else. So even if down the road you do lower it down, they're still going to remember, well, that's that one guy that wanted twice as much as he should have. So, and you notice the response on listings goes way down after the first 30 to 45 days. So it's important to that, like you said, that first 30, 45 days, grab the people that are interested in that business and get them moving forward in the process right off the bat. Some of the other brokers that you've interviewed before have said time kills deals. And part of that is, while it's listed at the specific price, all that is time that really hurts the chances of success of the deal happening.
Yeah, good point. And that's a very good point. I would always tell my seller clients, and do to this day, that, get it right the first time, and, you control the process. You can say no to any buyer for whatever reason you want. But if you want to get the price right, do it correctly, and then have a background of why you priced it the way you did. And look at other variables too when you price. Like, is there going to be financing involved? Is it going to be selling right away? Or I had a client who was going on vacation, is doing a 2-week cruise. So we had to close later. So what other variables are involved? But really think about these things before going to market, and then pricing your business. So can you give us any other examples that you've come across lately, or maybe in your past, for pricing that our viewers might want to know about?
I think it's one of the most important things I think is to remember is when your broker or whoever you decide to work with, pro-sale program, they give you an idea of what a possible selling price should be. It's not them, for example, it's not me telling you how much I think the business is worth. Like I said before, I don't have my checkbook out getting ready to write a check for the business. I'm telling you what the marketplace is paying for similar types of deals. And I had a client who was frustrated. He said, well, you're only looking at either the bad lease or the bad neighborhood or these negative points. You're not looking at these positive points. And I told him, to get frustrated with what the marketplace does or thinks is just an exercise in futility. It's going to do what it does regardless of your feelings or emotions or, all the opportunity and, prospects that your business has. What the marketplace is doing is just what it does. So can't take it personal. You just have to understand that the marketplace acts with its own forces regardless of what you do. So just keep that in mind.
Good.
We're not there to pass judgment. We're just there to provide information of what the marketplace is feeling.
Good point. And the other perspective too that I think sellers need to understand and realize is that buyers actually are kind of gun shy about making an offer. It's hard enough to get an offer from a buyer, but if they feel that a price is unrealistic, you're not going to get an offer. So again, you need to have some kind of realistic explanation of how you got that price. And if anything, I can tell all brokers and agents out there, really do your homework about why you're pricing the business it is, and think twice about just, taking the owner's word of what they want and then just slapping it up on BizBen and other services and seeing if it works. What a waste of time. I mean, business brokers have a 95% turnover rate in the first year. Well, in my experience, that's why, is because they don't do a professional job of, when they take a listing, of finding out what a business is really worth. I mean, and this has been a great topic. I mean, and I think our industry really needs to explore this more. Do you price it high at first, and then also unrealistic expectations? Craig, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close up shop here on the podcast?
Yeah, I think just a closing comment would be that, with homes or buildings or other investments, with a house, someone needs a house to live in. But with a business, a buyer of a business has a million other things he can do with his money, including doing nothing at all. So when you keep that in mind and look at the opportunity from the buyer's perspective, that he doesn't really have to spend $250,000 on his business. He can just leave in the bank and do nothing. So you really got to entice them to want the business, and that the first thing of getting them there is making sure the price is in line with what he would expect to see for your type of business. So.
Good info. Craig, I want to thank you for being on the BizBen vlog and podcast, today's version. Again, this is Craig Oosterhouse that's with me today, business broker in the San Francisco Bay Area. Thanks, Craig.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining today's featured show with your host, Peter Siegel, on the BizBen podcast. When buying or selling a California business, franchise, or business opportunity, make sure you receive professional advice on all legal and business matters pertaining to any transactions. The opinions and information expressed by today's guest are not necessarily endorsed by BizBen and Business Exchange Networking. Please join us again in the future to learn, share, and experience case studies, interviews, and focused information on the topic of selling and buying small to mid-sized California businesses.